It's taken us a little while to get all this just in the format we want to, but we've got it. This is unbelievable, and it's also unbelievable whenever I have my good friend Dan Burke here from the Connecticut Historical Society, the Stamford Connecticut Historical Society. And today, I believe we're going to be speaking on some of the recent endeavors you've involved in. For a moment, where have you been since the sports exhibit and your last time here?
Well, there was this big lull. The sports exhibit was pretty successful. I've been in the process of trying to make a video version of it for the out-of-town people who couldn't get to see it. We're working on the next exhibit. We're not sure what that's going to be just yet, but we do have a thing up kind of called Neighborhoods now. It's just a temporary thing. A lot of the old Springdale, Glenbrook neighborhood photos from way back. An interesting little bit about Univille, when they decided to use eminent domain to grab a gigantic swath of northern Stamford, northern Greenwich, and parts of Westchester to build an entire, almost a state just to house the United Nations, which is pretty interesting. They obviously didn't happen, but they came across some heavy hitters that lived up there and wanted no part of it. Old Yale and Town images, the old bicycle shops and the Blickensdorfer typewriter company. It's a lot of local interest. The old Stamford, the Cove Mills was pretty neat. That's up now while we plan the next one. We had our big project Mr. Ron Marcus and I have been working on for 3 years, trying to restore the service roll, and it's now, we're waiting to get that bound and sent to the Library of Congress and the state.
It's about time.
Which lists all of Stamford. They lost all the names of the Stamford men and women who served in World War II. And they existed on this big three-sided wooden structure in the middle of town. Everybody had an individual nameplate with their name on it, and when they tore that down for urban renewal, they did not realize that was the only record, the only list of names. So we've been the best we could restoring it, not physically, but
virtually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We think we're about 98% accurate. Probably missed a few, but we did our best. And we see where we go with that.
It's a fascinating endeavor. The Stamford Historical Society is on High Ridge Road in Stamford, Connecticut, and even if you're not from the city of Stamford, it is a treasure trove of incredible items, and I highly suggest you attend. I'm always trying to attend, but like I'm never there on that day, or it's not open, or my left foot is 3 to my right,
Yeah.
and every time I drive away heartbroken. It's just a magnificent treasure of things that are there.
There's not a lot of, most of the historical societies don't have the funds to stay open like all week long. They're not like, I know that the New Haven Historical Society does pretty well.
Yeah, sure.
But the Stamford Historical Society gets very little support from local government. Not that they dislike us, they just have other uses for the money, like little things called schools. Which so they have to prioritize with the how they use the money they have. So we're there 3 days a week. We do the best we can. We're a very small volunteer staff, very little funding. But for me, I'm always tripping over things that just interest the hell out of me.
Yeah, me too.
And before we proceed with this one, which we literally stumbled on, I have to say that I'm not a schooled historian. I'm just a guy that's interested in it, so if I say something incorrect, you have to forgive me in advance.
Yeah,
I try not to bungle too much.
Or you could write me hate mail, as some people do.
Go get a lawyer and sue everybody like some people do in the age we live in. So where would you like me to begin?
Well, I guess today we're talking about the Revolutionary War and the colonial underpinnings of Stamford, and I guess our first slide has us maybe fittingly at a tombstone. This has started this whole process. Like I said, while I'm not a trained or schooled historian, I'm a retired administrator from television production at HBO. I've always liked this stuff, and we discovered that the pension request for Revolutionary War soldiers can now be seen
in the National Archives. You can look them up. So we have this young fella. His name is this. Different spellings of his first names is Haight, H-A-I-T, or Hoyt Schofield, which is a prominent name in town.
Sure.
We looked him up in the pension request, and they document what he did during the Revolution. And this young son of a farmer / shoemaker had his toes in all sorts of history. Just fate took him to places that, everybody in the country knows about. This young fellow enlisted in 1775, and he found himself in the Battle of Brooklyn Heights, which was also called the Battle of Long Island, and that was in 1776. He went from there to the Battle of White Plains in October of 1776. Then he crossed the Delaware with Washington in Christmas of 1776 and attacked Trenton and the Hessians and all that. Then he was at Valley Forge with Washington from the winter of 77 to 78. And then he got transferred to Tappan, New York with his militia unit. And this is where everything, all sorts of stuff starts swirling around young Haight Schofield of Stamford, Connecticut. When he was at Tappan, New York, it was the same time Benedict Arnold decided to betray his country. He was the commander of that point, the commander of West Point. And,
Mr. Schofield.
Mr. Schofield was just a private in the militia at Tappan, New York.
Right.
Benedict Arnold was put in command of West Point and intended to turn it over to the British. And he met this Major John Andre, this very dashing, handsome British officer. He had met him before. His wife actually introduced Benedict Arnold to Major Andre, and some historians speculate there might have been some monkey business between Major Andre and Mrs. Arnold, but I don't know about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I guess Benjamin took a bath every Saturday with her.
Yeah, I know. That's good.
Yeah.
So anyways, they make an agreement. Andre sails up the Hudson River on a British man-of-war called the Vulture, and they drop anchor, and he's rowed ashore, where he meets Benedict Arnold in a place. Joshua Hett was the guy's name. He owned the house. He was a loyalist, and they were meeting in there to put down the treason. Arnold wanted money. They're haggling over the money and everything. Interestingly enough, the people on the shore, the civilians that lived around the shores of the Hudson River, see this British man-of-war sitting out there. And in those days, British units would either come off boats or just come right up the road and take people's stuff. They would forage for food or whatever. Those are the original cowboys. That's where the cowboy came from. They called those guys cowboys. I think the Patriot side had guys that did the same. I think they called them skinners. But I do know that they did call the British cowboys for stealing. So a bunch of the townsfolk went to West Point looking for Benedict Arnold to say, what are you doing letting this British man-of-war just sit out there and possibly come pillage our towns and our homes?
Right.
And so Benedict Arnold wasn't there, though. He was busy at Joshua Hett's house betraying the country. So a junior officer takes it on himself to roll a couple of cannons down to the riverside and start shooting at the Vulture. And they did so, and the captain of the Vulture said, this isn't going to work, and he hoists anchor, and they go a little bit farther down the river. When Arnold and Andre are finished with their business, Andre is talked into putting on civilian clothes, which changes the entire scenario. He's now in civilian clothes. That makes him a spy. He goes down to where he thought the Vulture was going to be. It's gone. He's stuck. Joshua Hett takes him on a horse, and they ride down the river. They go to a place, I forgot what it's called now, some little ferry crossing. Cross over there to the eastern side of the the Hudson and start riding down the road trying to get to the British camp. Just outside of Tarrytown, they're stopped by 3 militiamen who find Arnold to look suspicious. They get him down, they search him, they find the plans to West Point. That was the game plan. They were going to turn over West Point to the British. The plans, they'd have taken West Point, they'd have cut the revolution in half, we would have lost, and probably everybody we knew as a founding father would have been hung.
As a traitor.
That was a traitor. That's what they told them they were going to do. And that actually, something far more gruesome than that. They were going to draw and quarter them, you know, which is like literally
Right.
tearing them into pieces while they were still alive, and then hanging them and letting them. So that's where he's caught. They arrest him. They take him back across the Hudson to Tappan, New York. Throw him in a hotel or inn/jail, where the guards are Haight Schofield and his buddies. And and he's also called upon to witness the execution of Major Andre. If you want to go to number 2.
Number 2. Okay, this is very interesting. We have a handwritten document.
This is documented. This is his Haight Schofield's pension request. It's a copy of it.
Mhm.
It's kind of hard to read. I underlined as best I could, where he sort of lists where events he was involved in his application for his pension. I think this was 1830. He lived until 1840, so he was quite an old man.
Did he live in the city of Stamford, or was then?
No, he lived in Stamford, the town then, I think. But anyways, that was his pension request. So it goes through all of this stuff. The revolution ends. He comes back to Stamford, goes back to his farming and shoemaking or whatever, and lives out his life. And he's in a little cemetery on the side of Newfield Avenue.
Ah.
But all the events that were going on there were interesting as well. When Benjamin Talmadge, very famous for these parts.
Okay.
He was a
Talmadge
Connecticut
Hill.
boy. Yeah,
Right.
He was a Connecticut boy. Benedict Arnold was from Norwich, Connecticut.
That I did not know.
Yeah, and they were Connecticut guys. And so when they caught Major Andre, they sent a courier up to West Point to tell Benedict Arnold they caught a guy that they believed was a spy. Benedict Arnold now knows the jig is up. He said, "I'll be back in a minute." He goes out the back door and disappears. And Andre was, by all accounts, an extremely charming guy. Handsome, young, very dashing. Everybody took to him. And they did not want to execute him. Washington actually came shortly thereafter, realized he'd been betrayed by a close friend. Takes correspondence from Andre, who's saying, I shouldn't be hung. I'm not a spy, so on and so forth.
I'm a good guy after all.
He began to make stuff up too, and in a certain way, Andre was a scoundrel because he was incredibly resentful that he'd been captured by 3 guys that he referred to as rustics. The 3 militiamen who got him were like farmers.
Right.
And it was like this, and there was still, whether we like to admit it or not, there was a class thing going on then, and it wasn't just the British, an upper class guy like Andre, because among the people, the members of the Continental Army that were at this location at the time was Benjamin Talmadge, who he himself was something of an aristocrat. So he tended instinctively to believe anything Andre said, because the guys
He had an
were just
aristocrat.
rustics who caught him.
Right.
And Andre accused them of bribing him. And these 3 guys really adamantly denied that. But that's another, a little later on, if you want to deal with it a little later.
And what caught me here, what are some of the particulars on this pension request? What does he request?
Well, just, it's like little small stipends of money. It wasn't much, but it was something. I mean, this is kind of interesting when we didn't have a whole lot of money in this country. There were problems afterwards about payment to these guys.
Sure.
And,
there was no industry.
We kind of came across all these things. A lot of the people that remained loyal were sort of run out of the country. Some of the big names in Stamford, some of the big property holders in Stamford, from way back, got their property from lands confiscated by the Loyalists. That's another whole thing. They went up to Long Island, and then they put them on boats up to New Brunswick. There's a big old institution up there that studies what became of all the. Some of them came back. Some of them, you had families, like in Stamford, families split in half. But because of that, the Loyalists eventually could come back and be with their families again, but others no.
So we'll move to our next slide here. And
this is just an illustration of Andre and Arnold working their plot. I just, I'm a guy, and guy needs visual stuff.
And this is and how could I put it? Now, the Revolutionary War was, I imagine 7 years.
It was. It started in 1775,
mm-hmm.
and it went to 1783. This was 1780.
Now, was it a war of constant combat, or was it life went on, and then the armies are trying to gain control in the places? I mean, it's just, for me, it's difficult to imagine.
It took a long time to move an army from one place to another.
Mm-hmm.
A little farther on in this, when we come to Andre as a good man, I'll talk about a battle he was in with David Waterbury, who was a general from Stamford.
Okay.
So
we'll go to our next slide.
And now these are the three militia guys who. This is an illustration of them capturing Major Andre. You'll notice there are other illustrations of this that show them capturing Major Andre in British uniform.
Mm-hmm. Now, where did this illustration come from?
I just pulled that off the internet just to have a visual. Okay. But you'll notice he's in civilian clothes here. This was north of Tarrytown. This was called. It was an historical site for a while, supposedly. It was called the Andre tree. It was a big deal for a while. It was hit by lightning decades and decades ago. So these three militia guys, they got them sort of lounging around like they're nobodies, and they catch Andre.
Capture. So we'll go to the next
other illustrations.
Washington Spymaster.
That was Benjamin Talmadge. He operated a spy ring for Washington, and he used to launch raids as well across the Long Island Sound. There's a stone marking a spot he launched a raid from behind the Stamford Yacht Club.
Now that's interesting. The spelling of his name there is 2 L's.
Yeah.
And I think today it would be 1 L.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I was sort of wondering about that myself.
Interesting. So we'll move on to the next one, and then
this is they call that the 1776 house. That was an inn where Major Andre was held captive, where he met all these people who were just charmed the heck out of. Before we move on to the next one, he when they took him for execution, people were weeping because he had charmed them so much. But historians have looked back at this and said he was a bit of an exaggerator and a liar. He told a story about having been in love with a woman and all that. There's an interesting book I read called The Execution of Major Andre, which goes into a lot of this. His accusations
mm-hmm.
against the three militiamen, spiteful things he said in general, threatening, implying that the British would avenge him by killing American prisoners. He did say that to Talmadge that you can't hang me as a spy. I'm a soldier. And Talmadge responded, "Well, you hanged my classmate Nathan Hale, who was a soldier." When he was finally hanged, they didn't just cut the rope. The tradition was only, it was a spy or a traitor or a deserter or something. They just cut the rope and let the body flop. When Andre was taken down, they very gently cut the rope and held him and put him in a casket. If you want to go to the next spot.
Sure, and then we'll make this the last one before the break.
I'm sorry. That's an illustration of one of those guys in the blue uniforms with maybe modeled after Haight Schofield. But,
Okay, so we'll go
so
to
go to the
the
next
one
one.
after the hanging, and we
This
have
is a monument to Major Andre that still sits in Tappan, New York. That's the spot of the execution. And it's in an odd place. You drive around. I took that picture. We were driving back from Syracuse, and I realized it was there, and my wife and I
Isn't that something?
checked. It's like in a little
the actual spot.
Yeah, it's like a little small residential neighborhood. You're driving up a little hill, and there were little small houses, you know, and all of a sudden the road sort of curls around this little island in the middle, and there's that monument to Andre. He impressed them that much, and this is all these 200 plus years later, they still keep this little spot well groomed and cared for. It's like a thing of honor with the people of Tappan.
Yeah, it's we freed ourselves of a traitor, and much more to come here. Tony D'Angelo, Dan Burke on Connecticut Morning. Don't go away. The best is yet to come. And this is just such a fascinating study. And what I'd like to get into, as I'm sure we will, is how all of this ties into things at Stamford. We'll get closer to that. Right back after this. We'll see you in a moment.
The 100% electric Nissan Leaf. Innovation for the planet. Innovation for all.
Back again, Tony D'Angelo, Dan Burke, and Connecticut Morning doing this fascinating study of the Revolution and its ties to Stamford, Connecticut. And this is an amazing amount of work that's done here. And we move to our next slide. And let me tell you what I think I'm seeing, because I'm sure a lot of our viewers have the same impression. It looks like almost, I'm going to say a manger on a sculpture on a flower pot. You tell me.
It's a stew pot.
A stew pot?
No. No.
You could have fooled me.
Andre, like I said, Major Andre was deeply honored, they admired by the people of Tappan. And when word reached England about what happened to him, he became like the national hero, which is kind of what people think, some historians think he had in mind in the first place. He was scared about being executed, but he put on this big show.
A national hero in
Great Britain.
Great Britain.
So some years later, not very long after he was executed as a spy, it was arranged to have him disinterred and have his body and bones returned to England. And he was removed from his grave in Tappan with great honors and sent back to England. And that is his sarcophagus at Westminster Abbey. We got to see that when we visited London a couple of years ago. So that is
what is the fascination? And I guess is it the anti-hero? Is it the patriot? Is it the?
Well, to the English, he was a patriot.
Yeah.
You know, and he gave his life for his country. We honored Nathan Hale. Interestingly, I think that both Nathan Hale and Andre kind of screwed up. If you get into the meat and potatoes of how they did their operation.
But that would be his sarcophagus.
Yeah, so it was interesting to me. If you want to see what's next.
Sure. The Fidelity Medallion.
The Fidelity Medallion. We're probably rolling in towards the militiamen who captured Andre. This was actually the first medal ever given to an American serviceman. There's another one that was considered officially the first. But George Washington gave these Fidelity medals to the three militiamen who captured Andre. And interestingly enough, while I was researching this, a guy comes into the Stamford Historical Society, and he is looking into the Schofields. Not Haight, but another wing of the Schofield family. He turns out to be a descendant of one of these three guys, and the family still has amongst their heirlooms his fidelity medallion. I'd love to hold one of those.
Now, what was that golden?
Nah, it was just probably a little cheesy little
Pewter?
metal. It was not
Yeah.
pewter, who knows? But that's what they gave them. And interest, while Benjamin Talmadge was busy sort of insulting these guys by siding with Major Andre's interpretation of events, Washington really was proud of them. Later on, we'll see. Do you want to move to the next?
We'll move to the next, and then this is a monument.
That's a monument.
I got that right.
This is a monument. This is in Tarrytown. It's pretty neat. It's just beyond that is the village of Sleepy Hollow,
Right.
where Washington Irving. That's about he wrote about the Ichabod Crane, the headless horseman. We went into this little cemetery there, and Washington Irving. He based his characters after people he knew from Sleepy Hollow, and I'm going to forget this now. Ichabod Crane's love interest, he used her real name, and man, I can't believe I just slipped from my head. Anyways, we got to visit the grave of the woman who he patterned that character after.
Isn't it? And this is.
But this is the people, the friends of those three militia guys, and the people from Tappan. Were really proud of what they did. One of the militia guys had been captured by the British 3 times, and managed to escape. And actually, one of his last escape, he did so by climbing over a fence, running away under gunfire. He stole a green jacket that the Hessian troops used to wear, and he was wearing that green jacket the night they caught Andre. But anyways,
it changed the course of the United States.
Well, it really did. And
Yeah.
so the people, their friends of Tappan, were so outraged about the accusations of their being, trying to bribe Andre and all that they rounded up funds to build this monument to honor them. It sits right on the side of the road. Very easy to find if you're interested in this sort of stuff. You just go to the Tappan Zee Bridge and take the last exit and drive.
And when I often tell people, and I'm kind of going off the page here a little bit, that one of my standard, if you have absolutely nothing to do, not far from there, maybe a little bit more central in Westchester, is the Gate of Heaven Cemetery.
Yeah.
Which is a Roman Catholic cemetery that's very ornate, and the famous people, especially like Mark's a Yankee fan. Billy Martin, Babe Ruth is buried there. Jimmy Cagney's there. It's just in these, and some of the most beautiful land that you're ever going to see. 25 miles north of New York City,
yes,
which is not known for beautiful.
When I first retired, I took a drive up there and took pictures of the Billy's. The Babe's grave is a hoot.
Right. People put the schedule.
Right, and they leave beer cans. This one's for you, Babe. Thanks, pal.
Yeah, I remember one of the World Series celebrations, David Wells, when he was a Yankee, was celebrating by going out to the monument, getting a can of beer, and making the Babe drink beer. It was,
he bought one of Babe Ruth's hats.
Yeah, and he wore it.
They wanted to wear it. They made him take it off.
Yeah, they almost forfeited the game.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's that one.
That's interesting.
Okay. Now this
is a plaque.
Now Benedict Arnold. He ran off and became a general with the British Army. And they went to England, where he couldn't find work. He couldn't find anything. The people didn't trust him. There was a certain amount of disgrace that went with being a traitor. He just didn't have a very good life after he betrayed
Well, he
Washington.
couldn't really quite place himself because the
No.
British didn't know where to put him, and
They
the
didn't,
Americans
trust
already
him.
decided
I mean,
upon
they
him.
didn't, they
Yeah.
didn't trust him. You know,
Sure.
even when afterwards, when you know, we wanted to get back into the British Army, they didn't know whether or not they could trust him, that if he wouldn't do it again somehow. But,
Sure.
But in any event, he was buried. Grave behind some small church in England, and not very long ago, this Mr. William Stanley of the Norwich Historical Society decided to do something about this, and because he was, I don't want to call him a defender of Arnold, but he thought Arnold should be forgiven and get credit for the things he did before the betrayal. I think there is a carving of a boot that is the only memorial to Benedict Arnold as a patriot when he was wounded in the leg, I think at Saratoga, I think. That's it. But this Mr. Stanley, who actually was a businessman and a state senator, he thought he should be honored for more of that. So he went over there, and I think he dropped like $15,000 of his own money to put this stone on on Benedict Arnold's grave in England. And there it sits. He got a lot of flack from that. He passed away not too long ago, but there was a lot of...
Well, you know, it's interesting, and the term, quote-unquote, Benedict Arnold, I think we all probably heard that a lot growing up. If you grew up in the you're a Benedict Arnold, meaning you're a traitor. Today, I don't think, you mentioned Benedict Arnold, it's like, oh, is that the founder of Arnold Bread? It doesn't have that same, and Cramden saying to Norton, that bum, that Benedict Arnold, it was, but yet it's, today, I don't think it has that same weight.
Just like there was nothing, he was like, almost like it was jealous. He mad because he didn't get a promotion, he was mad because he didn't get a lot of money. So, anyway, so he didn't do it for any noble purpose.
So what we're going to do here is we're going to cut to a commercial and come back with the rest of this. Tony D'Angelo, Dan Burke, and Connecticut Morning, and we'll be right back at you right after this.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4,
Good day.
3, 2, green light.
All-new Chevy Sonic. From your first time to the time of your life. Chevy runs deep.
My viewers always, you didn't have to be so nice, but you always are, and I'm always touched by that. Tony D'Angelo and Dan Burke here on Connecticut Morning. Hour 2, we're right in the meat of this show of the Revolution and its connections to Stamford. And Dan, I'm learning so much here as we go. I'm sure our viewers are here, whether you're seeing this live or you're seeing this actually in the, in the aftermarket, as we call it, when it's posted up on YouTube. But this is, we move to our next slide here on the break. This was in our, after the one which was shown before with respect to Benedict Arnold. Now, this is an actual plaque with a...
I was trying to find out who put that there. This is outside of his residence. If you ever wander the streets of London, you'll see these little plaques on the houses for what famous people live there. It's pretty cool, you don't get a little map. You just wander around, and look up, and see a plaque on the wall. Arthur Conan Doyle lived here. So this was on his door. I found it interesting. I looked around trying to figure out who put that up. I don't know. that it was interesting to me that somebody would call him an American patriot.
Well,
Somebody in London would call him an American patriot.
Now, I'm going from a very dusty memory here, but was there not a plaque? Whatever street that is in Stamford, is that Bank Street where C.L. Miller's used to be? The one that runs sort of, you know...
Frankel's isn't. You know what? I think C.O. Miller's was in a couple of places.
We'll actually say the last reincarnation.
I think so, but
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to.
If you walked along there, I don't know if it's still there, there was a plaque that said George Washington either stayed there or slept there or did something there, and it always I don't remember the exact task.
I think there's I think there's a dispute about whether he actually
Came through Stamford or
came
not?
through Stamford. There's supposedly a little cabin in the woods off of Vine Road, near Malvern and Val Vine Road, where my friend Beverly lives. Beverly, her husband and mother. I'm sorry, I didn't. There's supposedly a cabin back in there that he stayed in. Again, I don't know. People say he did, people say he didn't, and I don't know enough to speak with any authority. However, there is a stone down there somewhere. There are mile markers that Benjamin Franklin was involved in. They're little mileage markers. That was a project he took on. Most of them, people would take those things and use them to build stone walls. They knock them down. Only a few of the originals remain. There's one just off the Post Road in Darien. That's an original.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure. I know Ron Marcus from the Historical Society some years ago went on a big project restoring them. And there's one right in that area. So I don't know if you call it a stone plaque, but it's one of those mileage stones, the Franklin stones. And it's behind the old town hall, right about where you would be talking. But anyways, this is
pretty.
interesting. They call him an American patriot. This is interesting. People they talk about Paul Revere's ride, and some people say he rode down the roads shouting, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" Well, he didn't say that because when he had his ride, Paul Revere was British. They still considered themselves British, and so he probably said, the redcoats are coming or whatever. I don't know, but. I don't know. I'm surprised they didn't call him a British patriot because he was. Anyways,
We move to our next.
This is that beautiful woodland cemetery in Stamford.
Ah,
That's a cool place. I mean, it's like I guess it's kind of a
well, and just to stick a pin there, are Stamford notables buried there? Would you know of a couple off the top?
that guy.
Okay, we'll start with
General David Waterbury. There's a lot of numerous. Civil War veterans.
Mhm.
Some of the names, the Skiddies. The Skiddies were the people that owned the Cove Mills for a while. But it's a beautiful. It's like you never
think it was
you never
South
think
End
it's
Stamford.
South End. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
beautifully cared for, and all. I had an interesting little experience. When I first got involved in social media. I was doing it for class reunions. It was going to be a 3-school thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I went on a site called classmates.com to try to find
with
people and
people,
connect
sure.
with people. And because it was a 3-school reunion, I was interacting with the other schools, and to draw attention to the old town, I would put up little tidbits here and there. And I end up being contacted by a woman from Australia, whose name was Jane Bradley, and she graduated from Stanford High with my mother in 1942. And in the course of our conversation, she mentioned her father, who was a Stanford veteran of the First World War, who she adored. But he died when she was just a young girl, and he's buried in there. Now, she's been in Australia for I don't know how many decades, and there's nobody there to care for his grave. And I told her if I ever could, I'd try to find it. And several weeks ago, I went down to the place, and I met the director, and I told him what I was looking for, and he looked on the plots. His name is Cilio. He's a great guy, and we we go to where this thing is supposed to be, and there's a gigantic bush. So we figured there must be a mistake. You know, we look at this side and look at that side, but there's a big old bush there. So, you know, having done this before, the thought entered my mind. I pulled the branches apart, and sure enough, there he is. The thing has been so many years untended that this big shrub grew up and covered his grave and another.
Amazing.
So Mr. Stilio was, the very next day, he had the crew come and dig the bush out and get the stone out, and I was able to take a nice photograph of it and
Isn't it great?
send it to his 90-year-old daughter in Australia. So weird stuff like that, I know, I guess.
So this is the grave.
So this is General David Waterbury, who was a Stamford boy.
Mm-hmm.
And this interconnects, again, with all this whole circle of things, Benedict Arnold. David Waterbury served with Arnold during the invasion of Canada. And Arnold, it was an ill-advised attack on Quebec. And they got their butts kicked around pretty good, and they were withdrawing. And this sort of takes us to, I think that maybe I'm not sure.
Well, and I just want the quote unquote the Continental Army tried to attack Canada.
Yes. Yeah, and you know the British.
You didn't hear that, folks.
Well, I think what they wanted to do is they wanted to take Quebec and see if they can get the French-speaking people up there to side with us.
Ah, interesting.
So
we'll go to the next slide.
This, I had not intended to put this in here, but this actually is the stone. It's behind the Stamford Yacht Club, and it marks the spot where Benjamin Talmadge launched a raid on Long Island, and he came back with like 175 prisoners. He was the Washington spy master, and also a Connecticut guy. But that's Talmadge and Talmadge.
And how far does that plaque go back in your estimation?
You know what? I can only guess. I really don't.
It looks
know.
like several hundred years. It's
yeah.
just. It's. I'm just judging by the color and the condition of the letters. We'll go to the next.
This is intended. This is the General Waterbury, the little plaque on that giant stone we saw at the Woodland Cemetery. So that's there. You know, he's the captain of the regiment. Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, and then his wife and daughter are buried there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that is really? And he lived approximately almost.
He's almost 80.
Right.
Arithmetic
And
makes me
then
hard.
he's heart of a man.
This is just a book. If you can see what it says on the bottom, my eyes are shot. Underneath the picture.
The Domestic Life of Men in Colonial New England by Lisa Wilson, Ye Heart of a Man.
This kind of stuff is not for everybody. But it was a little section in there about David Waterbury's wife. You know, about his being away. You know, if you're interested in that kind of stuff about colonial America, that's for you. But
now, do you know anything about Lisa Wilson and
no.
what, as far as did she take writings of?
Actually, Mr. Marcus told me about this book, and Ron Marcus told me about this book.
Yeah,
and,
whatever we can find, that
yeah.
is kind of interesting. So we'll move to our next slide.
Now
this is a boat.
Back to David Waterbury and the invasion of Quebec. It didn't work out so well. They were withdrawing. They were retreating back towards Lake Champlain. And this is, you asked a question about how long it would take back, the battles and what was going on. They were being pursued by the British, and they were going to go on Lake Champlain. The British took apart some of their fleet and hauled it across land to rebuild it on Lake Champlain and pursue the Americans. By the time they had to withdraw, General Horatio Gates was in command of the Continental Army troops that were up there. The original commander was replaced, and Horatio Gates came in. He orders Benedict Arnold and David Waterbury to build ships. Both Waterbury and Benedict Arnold were seafarers. Prior to the Revolution, Benedict Arnold was he was a sea captain and he was a tradesman. The same thing with Waterbury. They could build
They were
ships, and
shipbuilders.
ship captains and things. So he orders them to build a little fleet of ships to hold off the British while they make their escape. Interesting stuff real quickly about Horatio Gates. Horatio Gates was a rather accomplished British officer in the French and Indian War. Take a little look at his history, and I think his mother may have been like a lady-in-waiting to some aristocrat. But the long and the short of it was, no matter how good Horatio Gates was as a soldier, his social standing, his class placement, would not allow him to advance very far. So he that's how it was. Like none of our founding fathers could have ever gotten to a position in England that they had here. John Adams,
Sure.
a merchant's son, a
Right.
shoemaker's son. Alexander Hamilton was considered an illegitimate son.
Because they were not of that class.
They were not of that class. Benjamin Franklin, his father was a candle maker. Forget it. They would never get a chance to use their wits and intelligence. So Horatio Gates left England and he moved to Virginia, where he came to know George Washington, who also had been an officer in the British
Right.
Army, the French and Indian War. So when the Revolution, I guess he considered himself thoroughly an American, or whatever they would call themselves, when the Revolution broke out, because he sought out Washington and asked for a commission, and he got one. So this is really cool.
I'm fascinated with it.
This is one of the boats that Arnold and General David Waterbury built. Waterbury was on one just like this. I think this is the Pennsylvania. And Waterbury was on one that they built called the Washington. And they got out on the lake. Again, to how long did it take, not only for them to build their fleet, but the British to reassemble their fleet, put all this together so they can have a battle. So the British came down Lake Champlain, and right near Valcour Island on Lake Champlain, they meet Arnold and Waterbury and this little ragtag fleet that they put together. And they slowed up the pursuit, and it enabled Gates and the rest and Arnold to get away. This thing was sunk. But it was really cool. They managed to salvage it and restore it, and now sits in the Smithsonian.
Now, this, what approximately, how long ago was it recovered? Or how long was it sunk, I guess?
Well, I'm saying it was sunk for,
At least a
how
few
long
hundred
did this,
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
but there were a couple of hundred years. And how big a vessel is that?
I think these things are about 20 feet long.
Okay, so
I try to look up the order of battle and the description of what it was called. It's a gun or something. I don't know, it's some weird name for it. But they're flat bottom, and some of them were under sails, and some of them were propelled by oarsmen.
and they're not very big.
They're not that big, no. And it was they pretty much got wiped out, but they did manage to slow down a much larger, powerful
Wow,
British fleet.
That is
He was
amazing.
and Waterbury was captured and taken prisoner, later exchanged.
So we'll go to our next slide, and
This is just doodads and fillers. I thought
So
this is the Santa K, and I wish I should have put this in better order.
we'll take them as they come. It's fine.
This is for Stamford folks. You know where the canal is?
Okay.
Down by where the train yard is.
Yeah, Canal Street.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
This is a canal for commercial vessels that 150 years ago or more used to run right straight up into what is now the middle of town. We talked about this once before. And then when the railroad came through in the early 1800s, they dropped the track bed on top of the canal and cut it in half. But there were a lot of businesses had formed down there, and the Sante was one of a small fleet of ferry boats that used to operate out of there. If you want to just show up one.
And what year is that approximately?
This is probably 1920s.
Yeah, I'm going to say.
I'm guessing 1920s.
And that's interesting. And then
This is. I should have had this in better order. This is the boat stop, the ferry stop on Canal Street, 1800s. I don't have an exact 1800s.
now, what was the route of the ferry?
There were different ones. Some of them. This particular one would kind of come to that. Some of them went into the city. The Sante used to go to Oyster Bay.
Ah, okay.
And but that's the dock. They had cut off the canal, and they started using that dock for ferrying ferry boats and such.
I understand.
This is a little advertisement, for the North and East
Right.
River.
Now, these are steamships.
Yeah.
The Shady Side, the city of Stamford, and the Islander
Right.
will run daily except Sunday, leaving. And how long of a trip was that?
Well, you can, I'm not sure those things weren't cutting the waves at 40 knots.
Yeah.
They were probably pretty slow moving. I know before the railroad came in, it used to take 7 or 8 hours to ride a buggy from Stamford to New York City.
Sure, yeah.
So there's a couple more like that.
And this was in the newspaper?
This was in the city directories for the time. They were, they were-
Interesting. Interesting. So we'll move along. And
This is the little ticket for the ferry boat up in the upper right hand corner. A little advertisement, a nice
it's
little
good
ride
only
on the
for
sun.
the direction in which it
Yeah.
reads.
And the Shady Side on the East River near the Brooklyn Bridge in 1895.
Okay, so leaving Canal Dock, Stamford, landing in the East River, not telling you when, returning at 2:55 p.m. Doesn't give you a whole lot of time down there.
No.
And a single fare is 35 cents, an excursion is 50 cents. Is that like a bigger seat or something?
I suppose. You're not sitting under the smokestack.
Amtrak business class. That's it. Believe me, things I never knew. So we'll move along to where'd you come across the ticket? That's very interesting.
We have these things in our little files. We have all this neat stuff that people they sell their house. Somebody clears out the attic and throws a box on them.
And you find out these
But the Sante, the one we showed first all by itself, I got to write this down because I'm slow-witted these days. It was a real special ship when it was first built, and it made I was up in Massachusetts, it made the Bedford, Martha Vineyards, Nantucket run.
Wow.
That was like a real big deal for all the socialites and everything. And then, it ran from 1911 to 1924, but it caught on fire and burned, and they figured it sank. But then, some years later, a guy came along and he raised it, got it running again, and he took it under its own power up to Rockland, Maine, where they completely rebuilt it and sold it to the Stamford Group, where it did the Stamford to Oyster Bay run. Then they went and they built the Whitestone Bridge, and that put an end to the need for
right.
For that particular
and that
run.
was the first World
Yeah,
Fair
so they
around that
sold the
time.
Sante to Australia, who did use whatever I don't know how they got it across the Pacific
That
Ocean,
must have
but
been
they
quite an
did.
undertaking.
And then the Australians sold it to the Royal Navy, who rebuilt it in another form, and it became a minesweeper during World War II. So I don't know.
Quite a history. Any idea what became of it after?
No, I was actually trying to find it, trying to look under Royal Navy's vessels, and
No record beyond
no
that
record.
point.
That's
So,
the ad for
this is
another
the
one for the
actual
Shady
ad.
Side.
And this was in the town directory?
Yeah, so you want to have fun on a rainy afternoon, come in there and just open up some of these things from the 1800s and all the little,
Now that's
Black.
interesting. When did the town directory cease publication? About 1970s?
No, we have them going farther than that. They look like gigantic phone books now.
Right.
I think they stopped in the 80s, but I'm guessing.
Mhm.
The old ones are just such fun to look through.
They really are.
See what kind of.
Well, they listed people's residences and their occupations.
Some of them, yeah.
Yeah. And
This is a little throwback thing. When we were here.
we were talking about the sports
The
exhibit.
sports exhibit. This was, and I had mentioned this fella, Dante Chicotel, who was part of this little group of my uncle. It consisted of my uncle Ralph and
Right.
his friends. That were just everybody, Greeks, Russian Jews, Poles, Italians, German kids, and they formed this little bunch of pals that were inseparable through life. They were on all kinds of sports teams together, and it was sort of the underlying theme to the sports exhibit. This glue, that all the
Right.
kids that play on teams, and it didn't matter where they came from. Dante was a great guy. If you want to go to the next one.
Mhm. Yeah, now before I'm reading his resume here. President of his junior class, vice president senior year. He was a forced sportman and went to New Hampshire University. And the question that I had actually, from when we had done it, was the young Dante, and we had the older Dante in the last show we did. Where did Dante spend his life? Or his profession or his occupation?
I think, again, I think he had a lot of different jobs.
Mm-hmm.
All his brother Frank was very big in local sports
Frank
and
was,
worked
yeah.
for the city.
Right.
His brother Carmine, who was my mother's age, I'm quite, to tell you the truth, I'm unsure of that. I mean, he was active his entire life,
Mm-hmm.
and he still is. So, if you want to.
So we'll move
that's
on.
That's Dante when he was with the Stamford Pros, one of the first semi-pro teams that Stanford had that went on to become the Golden Bears, and Dante was a part of that team as well.
Now, were they using leather helmets in
Yeah,
those days?
yeah.
Boy, that's amazing.
My
So-
uncle,
so we're hearing it.
the leather the leather helmet didn't do my uncle any good when he got poked in the face and lost an eye.
Right.
Dante was running right next to him when it happened, when they were in high school.
So, and then the pads, I could see they were very small,
Yeah.
non-existent. So
And
moving
this is
on.
Dante at his 100th birthday, just last year.
God bless him.
And I know we mentioned him the last time I was in here talking about the sports thing, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to that party in Darien. He's probably 101 now. That's his daughter Sandra in the back, whose husband is Junie DeLeo. Remember Junie?
The pitcher.
The pitcher,
The
great
pitcher,
pitcher.
yes.
Had a minor league shot.
Well, he was with the Met system.
Great,
Yeah.
great guy, great coach for the kids. And what a family. I mean, I got to meet them all, and one big, giant, loving family.
Isn't
It's
that
a lot of fun
something?
to be around them.
Well, Frank was the staple of recreation league ball,
Yeah.
and he was quite a character.
Yeah.
He'd be hitting fungos with his. He'd have a collared shirt and a tie, and slacks with cuffs and shoes. And okay, Sonny, here it comes. He was quite a character. God bless him. Next up, Benny DeSalvo.
Now this was just when I was at Dante's 100th birthday party. They had his yearbook, and I'm flipping through it, and I see Benny DeSalvo. Benny was an uncle of my good friend Al Callahan, who I met in 1962, and he's always talking about his Uncle Benny, and not always talking about it, but in a recent conversation we started reminiscing about the war and all that stuff. And Benny was a classmate of Dante and my uncle. And if you want to go to the next one.
Sure. Now, Ben hopes to study medicine. He looks like he's an athlete, and he is a member of the Italian club.
Benny joined in World War II. He joins the Air Force, and he's shot down. Al Callahan shared this letter. The Red Cross went to the prison camp, and he was allowed to write a letter home to his mother from the German POW camp, and I just thought that was interesting.
Wow. Now, did Benny come back to Stamford?
Yes, he did. And he passed away not too long ago.
Oh. Well, where did he spend his life's work?
I didn't inquire about that.
He was a lieutenant, so presumably he was treated, with some respect.
Better respect.
Yeah, interesting. And that's January 10th, 1944. Wow. And then
That's the letter.
dearest mom, and
I was recently taken in Holland. He was shot down over Holland. I'm absolutely all right, so please don't worry. I expect I'll be with you there for the duration. But I can't read that.
Boy, you know, and it's like you think of today in this world of like Facebook and LinkedIn and text and all this, and you just think of this mother, and this is her only remnant of her son, you know, and not hearing anything, and it's quite a contrast as far as today. We're moving up on a hard break.
This is probably this is Miss Aiken's school. This school was built, founded by Miss Aikens, that priorly had been called the Stamford Women's Seminary.
Right.
And Miss Aikens took it over, became Miss Aikens School for Girls. It was on Clark's Hill at the time. And the reason I have this up is that just after the Civil War, a young Frenchman came to Stamford. And she hired him as a teacher. He taught French and horseback riding there. And his name was George Clemenceau.
Okay,
next
so
one?
yeah, and what we'll do is maybe we'll hold George Clemenceau until after the break, because I wanted to ask you something about the mansions of Stamford. A couple of things that perhaps you can clear up, at least in my pea brain. Anyway, hope you're enjoying this as much as we are. Tony D'Angelo and Dan Burke here, coming up to our final half hour. Don't go away. Straight ahead, right back after this.
I would love to have the first one. I'm so sorry, Mr. Seinfeld, but you're number 2 on the list. Who's number 1? So you're number 1, and I'd like to be number 20. I'll throw all the soup nuts. Soup for you. Last living munchkin. I thought he passed away. I found another one. Anybody like dirty limericks? Final offer. Access to my personal network of Manhattan jet flying. Wow. Impressive. You got the first Acura NSX. How about the jetpack flying squirrel suit? Sorry, Trey. The Acura NSX. It's coming. All right. Can we talk about something else?
Back again for our final half hour. Tony D'Angelo and Dan Burke here on Connecticut Morning. And we're having a really great time because it's one thing about the history of Stamford is you'll start with something, it'll take you in 9 different directions, and it's just it's fascinating how much history has gone through there. But I wanted to put this mansion back up, and I didn't want to get away with it because maybe some of our viewers will know the reasons. As I was about 9 years old, and there was a split in the Catholic parishes of Stamford. We were in the part of town that was going to St. John's downtown. And I guess with more families, that church was getting overly crowded. And from what I recall, which isn't much, I was very young, or just listening to my parents' conversations, the Diocese of Bridgeport drew a line, and they said, okay, everybody on this side of the line will continue to attend St. John's, and everybody on this side of the line will attend a new church called St. Bridget's up on Newfield Avenue. And not everyone took to this very well. Some people were quite irate about it. You know, and there were stories as far as as far as what were taking place during the time, and there were some people. There's days we can control a lot here, folks.
Live television.
Yeah, for sure. We're coming to you live, and right before your eyes. And not everybody took to it very well. So the St. Bridget's Parish started in the location. Well, actually, it wasn't a direct start to that. The original Sunday services, I believe, if memory serves, were held over at the Stamford High School auditorium. And then some of them were held in St. Joseph's Hospital, depending on the time, if the auditorium wasn't used for something else. But there was a plot of property, which is where St. Bridget's is today, which is at the intersection of, I guess that would be either Strawberry Hill or Newfield Avenue, and that big long street with the huge hill that runs all the way down into Glenbrook, where the Jewish temple is, right across the way. And from what I understood, said all that to say this, this was property that was held by Cornelius Vanderbilt. It was one of his summer homes, and there was a huge mansion on that property, which I do remember the name of that was known as Caswell Hall. It just struck me as, and we would hold our religious instructions in there, and it was room after porch after sun porch, and it wasn't in bad condition. It was just, I don't know if this was purchased or if it was donated, but we had, and before the actual church property was built, this is sort of like the functional offices. And I can find, and I throw this out to our viewers and our listeners, I can find no information on this whatsoever, its origin. There were so many of these great mansions, and somebody said, oh, this happened to be one of Mr. Vanderbilt's summer homes. And I don't know, if you ever ran into anything like that.
No, I tell you, if you get Ron Marcus in here again for an interview, he would know that stuff. I know there's all sorts of stuff floating around. This one lived here, that one lived here. I don't know. When I'm down there, I'm usually digging around in this really old stuff. So.
And it's fascinating to me because I think that, it's how we've gone from these huge houses and now we just go to apartments. It's an amazing thing. But we'll move along. It's just,
okay.
It's quite an interesting thing. Before we leave there's it looks like a bunch of young women.
This is Miss Aiken's School for Girls on Clark's Hill. I posted this somewhere and somebody said, wouldn't you like to be able to talk to them? And that's one of the things I like. Some of the old pictures I find, you find these things from like 100 years ago. These immigrant workers at the Cove Mill, looking into the camera, And I don't know. I like staring back at them, wondering who they were and where they came from. This was when it was the Stamford Seminary for Girls. I believe it was mostly well-to-do Stamford girls. When Miss Aikens opened it up, if I'm reading correctly, it was obviously for the daughters of the well-to-do, and one of them is part of the story that involves Mr. Clemenceau. If you want to jump to the next.
Before we just jump to that, just for my own edification, if I were at Clark's Hill and I'm heading from the downtown to Darien, what corner would I find that on?
I'm thinking above. Where is the stone wall still there?
I believe the stone wall.
I think that's that big stone wall. I think it was above that.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So we'll move along because there's still a couple of very grand homes on that street. A little worse for wear. But now we move.
This was the French and horseback riding teacher at Miss Aiken's School for Girls on Clark's Hill, and his name is George Clemenceau, who would become the Prime Minister of France. He's called the Tiger. He was the Prime Minister of France during the First World War. Something of a revolutionary. Personally, I don't like him. From what I know of history, he's an arrogant. I thought he was an arrogant.
He sounds like the kind of person you'd find at a school for girls.
Yeah, if you want to click for the next one, the next one in the sequence.
Sure. And I guess writing was shall we say, it should be a part of the repertoire of a fine young lady. Therefore, it was taught. And we moved to.
And this is his student Mary, Plummer. I think her last name was Plummer. She was like a 19-year-old student of his, and she was very, very pretty. And I read quotes from one of her classmates. And I was trying to look her up and find out more about her. That they're talking about Clemenceau, and that he was very artistic, but he was just an odd guy, odd habits. He would get bored teaching and would start doodling stuff. Just stop teaching his students and start doodling stuff. And one of his favorite doodles was the face of pretty young Mary. And apparently this became rather scandalous You know, he and one of his students, but he ended up asking her to marry him. And then that became a whole big stink because he refused to get married in a church because he said he was an atheist. And, you know, and she's all like, well, what does it matter? You know, if you don't believe it, you know, it doesn't matter. We just, no. So he went back to France, and she eventually agreed to get married outside of a church, and so they did. And they went back to France together, where he launched his political career. And the minute he started making a name for himself, he started like throwing her aside. And
not a real nice guy.
no, I don't. You know,
Yeah.
And so by the time he became very prominent, he had gotten himself a whole array of mistresses and girlfriends and all. That's just the way he was. And didn't pay much attention to Mary at all. Well, she ends up having an affair with the children's tutor. And Clemenceau finds out about this, has her arrested, thrown in jail. He takes her kids, he arranges that she loses custody of the kids totally, and then deports her back to the United States. She did manage to go back. She did spend the First World War in France, but not with him. When they thought the Germans were going to actually get to Paris, he did offer to get her someplace safer, but she refused to stay where she was. She became a writer and things, but Clemenceau went on to be what he is. And if you want to,
Well, yeah, and I just, you know, and you had me back on the corner where he was drawing pictures on the blackboard. And I'm just thinking it's a hot day. These young ladies are dressed in their very, very, very hot finery. He's drawing pictures on the board, and they're probably either snickering or laughing or fanning themselves or wondering what they're doing there. It's amazing.
yeah, they said it was weird.
So we'll move on to the next slide.
And that's Clemenceau with Woodrow Wilson in Paris, the Paris Peace Talks of 1919. And we're coming up, I believe it's the 28th of this month,
Mhm.
the anniversary of the event that put a match to the fuse that blew up the whole 20th century.
And you know, we're going to stop right there because I'd like to go to a break, and that's something I'd like to focus on to discuss, because it's just this tie to Stamford and the whole history of Western civilization in the 20th and 21st century. I certainly want to give that the attention it deserves. So it's Tony D'Angelo and Dan Burke here in Connecticut Morning. We'll be back to you in one calendar minute. Sit there and watch us, because we won't disappoint you. Right back after this.
Nou, dit is dus de huiskamer. En dan komen we hier bij de slaapkamer. Oh ja. Met...
The discussion we've been having here is so fascinating. Tony D'Angelo and Dan Burke back for our last segment on Connecticut Morning. And Mark, you've got the picture here of Clemenceau and Wilson, and how I'm staggered that Stamford has a connection to the outcome of Western civilization in the 20th century. And Stamford has a great connection to the First World War. And you know, Dan, take it whatever way you want. There's just so much here. Here's our writing teacher.
Yeah.
Here's our writing teacher in the Girls Academy, who's with a president of Princeton University in New Jersey.
He used to
They're deciding the fate of the
these
world.
guys are Lloyd George, who was the Prime Minister of England, was involved. These are the Paris peace talks in 1919, which got nowhere and probably set the table for World War II.
Sure.
In
the League of Nations.
League of Nations. The way, these guys are all, except for Wilson, these guys are all colonialists. For no matter what they say. But there's a lot of sniping going on. Lloyd George talked about sitting between the two guys in his picture, and he said, felt like I was sitting between Jesus Christ, meaning Woodrow Wilson, and Napoleon Bonaparte, which was Clemenceau. And he didn't mean that as a compliment, because Woodrow Wilson used to, to make a lot of God references, talk about going back to his hotel room and praying on everything, and the Europeans just weren't like that. And it was interesting that they were all thinking the colonies. I read somewhere some of the wording of the League of Nations charters would have meant that if England, or at least it was interpreted in the United States as meaning that if England should have trouble with one of their colonies, like an uprising in one of their colonies, we might be obliged to go in and help them. And we weren't the imperialists they were, so that's right here or there. But as for Stamford, as for the country as a whole, we kind of got pulled into it late. You look at the causes of the thing. You understand why we always hear the refrain. Beware of European entanglements. And the whole thing, the whole First World War was absolute carnage, and it boiled down to essentially a family feud. If you look back on the royal family,
sure,
all this, who wants to have the biggest boats and all that stuff. But the 28th of this month is the anniversary of the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and we ended up getting pulled into the war eventually.
And that would be the 100th anniversary?
The 100th anniversary of the assassination.
Yeah. Right.
We didn't get into the war until 1917, but I always tell my kids, have a good breakfast so you don't go out and start a world war. Because the kid that shot Franz Ferdinand, Gavrilo Princip, was a teenager. He was part of an assassination team, and they came across the river and got into Sarajevo while Franz Ferdinand was visiting. And they all had their assigned locations. And the first guy was going to throw a bomb, and he did, and he threw it at the limousine. It bounced off the limousine, blew up on the side of the road, and wounded a couple of civilians. The result of that was all of a sudden security that wasn't there tightened up. And the rest of them, including Gavrilo Princip, realized, well, we can't do this. So he decides to leave. But he didn't have a good breakfast that day, like I tell the kids. So he stopped in a little roadside cafe to get something to eat. Meanwhile, Franz Ferdinand goes to the town hall, and he's angry. And he goes in, and he reads the mayor of the riot act, and turns around and goes storming out. Now the schedule for his trip is shot, and the limousine driver was outside expecting to be waiting for an hour or so. Is sort of startled to see Ferdinand and his wife coming down the stairs just a few minutes after he dropped them off. He's so rattled that when he gets in the limousine, he drives to the end of the street, he makes a wrong turn. He goes left instead of right, or right instead of left, whatever it was. When he realizes a mistake, he stops in the middle of the road to turn around, right in front of the cafe where Gavrilo Princip is sitting, getting something to eat because he didn't have a good breakfast that morning. Gets up, walks over to the limousine, kills Ferdinand and his wife. Boom, he ignites the 20th century. And the war gets going. Anyway, so...
well, and there's so many tie-ins in Stamford to the First World War. Like, my first, impression, if you were, the fact that there was a First World War was that statue fountain of the Doughboy on the corner of Bank and Atlantic, and I don't know what became of that.
This is interesting. We've been trying like crazy to find out when that was built and who built it. We can't find anything. There's nothing on it. If you go over to Veterans Park, that statue, a replica of that is in Veterans Park.
Yes.
The original, however, is over in St. John's Park. And in the middle of St. John's Park is this big monument. It's called the Sailor and Soldiers Monument. It has a listing of every Stamford soldier going back to the colonial wars. And there's a lot, you know.
Now, where is St. John's Park?
St. John's Park is like right down at the bottom of Grove Street and Main Street. The old Central Firehouse, St. John's Episcopal Church, where
yes.
Scalzi Paint used to be, and the Eagles Club is now.
Yes, I know where you are.
Yeah, I remember that thing in the middle of town. I used to love that thing. But for me, when I was a kid in the 50s, my grandma was the oldest of the immigrant generation, having come here in the 1890s, and her house was the gathering spot. And in the 1950s, my mother and father and I lived there. So I would see all these people, and my father and my uncles are all the World War II guys. They'd all sit and they'd tell their stories. And I look back on it now, and they never told about the hard stuff. I mean, I didn't know my father had nightmares about kamikazes until I was a grown man.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I didn't know my Uncle Joe had 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star until he was an old man on his deathbed. They didn't talk about that stuff very much. Just talk about the funny stuff. And sitting amongst them was my two great uncles, John Guzek and John Morus from the Polish wing of the family. I'm Irish, Italian, and Polish. And they would just sit there observing everything. And as a young kid, I went over to Uncle John Morus, who was a nice little guy. He's one of the founders of the Holy Name AC, by the way. You see the early pictures of it. He's there, you know. And I just went over to make conversation. I said, Uncle John, were you in the war too? And he said, not in the one they're talking about. I was in the other one. And I was a kid. There was another one? And that's when I first, you know, yeah, you know, so. And then I found out that the man that lived next door to my grandmother, Mr. Hemming, who ran he ran a laundry, and he was the head of the Launderers Association or something in town. And he too was a World War I vet. I started becoming curious about it. But when we got pulled into this, a large number of Stamford boys signed up to serve. And one of them was young Sam Tresser.
Of course, we know Tresser Boulevard.
Tresser Boulevard. Right. And he was killed at the Battle of San Miguel, assaulting the German positions. I collect artifacts. I have a small collection of artifacts because I can't afford a large collection.
It's like a lot of us.
And I have little doodads. I have buttons that were pulled out of the ground at the heights of Balaclava, where the Charge of the Light Brigade was. You know, back in the 1860s or whatever it was. And if you don't know what the Charge of the Light Brigade is, look it up. But I bought a piece of barbed wire that an American soldier had taken from the front of the German trenches at San Miguel, which is the same spot where young Sam Tresser was shot down. And I didn't know it when I got the barbed wire that's where Sam died, but now I've got the creeps on one. But it's the other interesting little thing was there was a place on Southfield Avenue where they made poison gas. They made poison gas for the trenches of World War I. And I mean, and we pictures of it. I mean, they have guys that they refer to as canaries, and I don't know. You read stories about coal miners that go down in the coal mines and stuff, and they'll bring a real canary in a cage because they're affected by the poisons that might be in the air far sooner. You know, and they would refer to the guys, some of these guys that worked in this poison gas plant. Armory, I forgot, something army, I've forgotten now. This is bad. But anyways, that they refer to them as canaries, and there would be hundreds of barrels of poison gas just sitting out there on a loading dock. You know, all these people living around the neighborhood with no idea. We don't. There's no record of the United States using poison gas in World War I. Though some people think that because poison gas was in fact used on American troops in certain places, that it's not beyond the realm of belief that an American commander might have said, "To hell with them, we're shooting some back." There's no official record of our ever having used it.
Now, wasn't that what Christy Mathewson, I think, eventually?
Christy Matheson was
the great baseball pitcher.
Right. He breathed in some poison gas, and it seared his lungs to the point of to shorten his life. He couldn't play baseball anymore. It's unbelievable. I mean, our guys went through some stuff. Stanford lost, I think, 28 guys. A couple in combat, a couple in plane crashes. Most of them to the 1918 influenza epidemic, which killed more people than the World War did. Millions and millions more. That was a project Mr. Marcus and I were going to work on, trying to find out just how many.
And then, in our closing minutes, I guess there's a lot of streets in Stamford that, I guess they were named after World War I veterans.
I guess some, this is another thing I can't. Tresor Boulevard.
Quintard, I believe, was
Quintard was one.
Sure.
Geez. I can't. I'm drawing. Now that we know we're crammed by time. I'm sorry.
No, it's perfectly okay.
Did you want to talk about Mr. Ferris?
Yeah, and then maybe in our last, we'll move back to the mansion and the actually, because the mansion. Now there were several mansions, I guess, in that point in time, but we were talking on the break about Mr. Ferris.
Yeah, the mansion. There was my grandmother, when she first came to this country. She was a kitchen maid in one of the Hoyt mansions. Apparently there were two, and I haven't been able to find out which one.
But Mr. Ferris.
Mr. Ferris, the Ferris family, that particular Ferris family, can trace their lineage back to the original. I think his name was Daniel Ferris, and he was one of the original settlers of Stamford in 1641. The area that was known as it was now Scalzi Park, but it was Woodside Park. That whole area was owned by them for years. Then in the 1860s, I believe, two Ferris brothers. Boy, this is bad. I'm forgetting.
Was Arthur one?
No, I want to say Silas and Jonathan.
Well, the two Ferris boys.
Yeah, there was a whole. I'm sorry. My mind just went blank on their first names. They actually designed what is now Scalzi Park, and there was a racetrack there. I didn't bring it. I had a ticket from the racetrack, and anyways, they designed it. They turned it into Woodside Park. And when Mr. Ferris, this last one of them, died, he was considered a miser. At the time, he was worth $1.3 million, which in today's money would translate to about 37 million bucks. And the house he was in cost 400,000 bucks then, and that would be like about 7 million now. And when he died, he had relatives coming that he never even knew he had, apparently, coming out of the woodwork, trying to claim pieces of his estate, and they got it. Luckily for the city of Stamford, he had just sold Woodside Park to the city. So that was to the benefit of thousands and thousands of young ball players from this town. If Mr. Marcus is able to get in here again, you have to ask him about.
I'll have a long list of questions.
He does.
Sure.
Ferris is when Ferris died, and Ron knew the woman that was sent to catalog everything he had in there, and it was like this mass, like a hoarder's house. It was like an untold fortune worth of negotiable bonds and things piled up in every which corner.
They were bearer bonds back then. That's for sure. They had the saber of one of his family members that served under Washington. They had it in the family. And we're wondering if we could ever track down where these things end up. Dan, we're out of time. We have to have you back again. It certainly has been fun. It's and even more fun to have you guys here watching. It's Tony D'Angelo and Dan Burke here in Connecticut Morning. We're so grateful. Thank you so much for coming and making the trip and the effort. And we'll do a lot more of this as we go. We'll be coming back real soon with Professor Bob Swick, kind of switching gears, talking about state and local government and the issues taking place. And don't miss it. See you in a moment.